So hi guys, welcome back to my channel. This the end. This the final video of foundation of your UX design experience. That's help you guys got knowledge and theory about UX design. This is episode 12. Let's get started.
Hi again! Now that you know the basics of user research, let's explore how bias can get in the way. In this video, we're going to discuss how bias specifically affects design work. We'll examine 6 kinds of biases: confirmation bias, false consensus bias, primacy bias, recency bias, implicit bias, and the sunk cost fallacy. To begin, let's define the word bias. In short, a bias is favoring or having prejudice against something based on limited information. It's like making up your mind about someone before you've really gotten to know them. We all have biases, and they're often unconscious. While we can't completely get rid of biases, we can be more aware of them and work to
The quality kind of bad. Sorry.
overcome them. In UX design, this is critical to product success and to your professional development. Everything we've learned so far has shown us that we aren't the user. We've also learned how important it is to put ourselves in our user's shoes when making design decisions. Biases can really get in the way of doing this. Later, we'll get into the details of how this all applies to your work. The first kind of bias to be aware of is confirmation bias. This bias occurs when you start looking for evidence to prove a hypothesis you have. Because you think you already have the answer, you're drawn to information that confirms your beliefs and preconceptions. Let's say you have the preconception that left-handed people are more creative than right-handed people. As you research, you'll tend to gravitate towards evidence that supports this belief, and you'll use it to build your case, even though it's not necessarily true. One of the most effective methods for overcoming confirmation bias during research is to ask open-ended questions when conducting interviews. An open-ended question lets the person being interviewed answer freely instead of with a yes or a no. You also want to get into the habit of actively listening without adding your own opinions. That means you aren't leading your interviewees towards the answer that you want them to give. Another way to avoid confirmation bias is to include a large sample of users. Make sure you're not just looking for a small group of people who fit your preconceived ideas. You want to have a big sample of users with diverse perspectives. Next up, let's look at the false consensus bias, which is the assumption that others will think the same way as you do. In UX research, the false consensus bias happens when we overestimate the number of people who will agree with our idea or design, which creates a false consensus. It's possible for the false consensus to go so far as to assume anyone who doesn't agree with you is abnormal. You can avoid false consensus bias by identifying and articulating your assumptions. For example, you might live in a community that often identifies with certain political beliefs. When you meet a new person, you might assume they share your political beliefs because you both live in the same town. But that isn't necessarily true. Finding a few people who do align with your beliefs and assuming they represent the entire community is a false consensus. That's another reason to survey large groups of people. Another kind of bias that affects designers is the recency bias. That's when it's easiest to remember the last thing you heard in an interview, conversation, or similar setting because it's the most recent. When talking to someone, you're more likely to remember things they shared at the end of the conversation. To overcome the recency bias, you can take detailed notes or recordings for each interview or conversation you have. This way, you can review what people said at the start of the conversation. in case you don't remember. UX designers might also struggle with primacy bias, where you remember the first participant most strongly. Sometimes the first person you meet makes the strongest impression because you're in a new situation or having a new experience. The primacy bias, like the recency bias, is another reason to take detailed notes or recordings, so you can review everything that happened, not just the memorable first impressions. Recency and primacy biases also demonstrate why you should interview each participant in the same way. Consistency makes it easier to compare and contrast over time. And consistency makes it more likely that you'll remember the unusual and important moments that happen throughout your research. The next form of bias we'll cover is implicit bias, which is also known as unconscious bias. Implicit bias is a collection of attitudes and stereotypes we associate to people without our conscious knowledge. One of the most common forms of implicit bias in UX is when we only interview people within a limited set of identity profiles, such as race, age, gender, socioeconomic status, and ability. These profiles are generally based on assumptions we have about certain types of people. For example, implicit bias might cause you to feel uncomfortable interviewing people whose life experiences are different from your own. On the other hand, we might choose to interview people from typically excluded groups, but then ask potentially offensive questions because of our internalized stereotypes. Both of these scenarios are problematic and lead to a lack of representation in our research and design process. The most important thing to note about implicit biases is that everybody has them. To overcome our biases, we can reflect on our behaviors, and we can ask others to point out our implicit biases. That's one of the best ways we can become aware of our biases. The last form of bias we'll cover is the sunk cost fallacy. This is the idea that the deeper we get into a project we've invested in, the harder it is to change course without feeling like we failed or wasted time. The phrase sunk cost refers to the time we've already spent or sunk into a project or activity. For example, you might think to yourself, I might as well keep watching this terrible movie because I've watched an hour of it already. For UX designers, the sunk cost fallacy comes into play when working on a design. You might have invested hours into designing a new feature, but then learn that the feature doesn't really address a user problem. It's easy to keep working on a design that you've invested time into, but ultimately, you need to focus on work that positively impacts users. To avoid the sunk cost fallacy, break down your project into smaller phases and then outline designated points where you can decide whether to continue or stop. This allows you to go back based on new insights before the project gets too far along. You're now familiar with the most common forms of bias in user research. It's important to know that there are other biases we haven't covered here. Bias is a limitation that extends well beyond the fields of UX design and user research. They can creep into the ways we make friends, manage projects at work, and communicate with family members. Now that you know about these biases, you might even start noticing them in your daily life. The more that identifying bias becomes a habit, the better you'll get at avoiding bias in your design process. As UX designers, we want to prevent biases from getting in the way of accurate research. You can always refer back to the glossary if you need a refresher about these biases and their definitions. Keep these tips in mind for overcoming biases, and you'll be on your way.
Okay, let's move to the next part. It's the reading part. This one I pretty before you guys read it. Don't skip it because this is important. Is provide you guys knowledge, especially important knowledge and how to income. And this also can apply into normal life and normal day. So specific focus in this reading part. This can change your guys' mindset. This part is about psychology, and this will help you guys a lot. About many link, I will attach it at the comment part.
Hi, my name is Dina. I'm a senior user experience researcher at Google. As a user experience researcher, I really channel the voice of people, their motivations, their desires, their needs. I bring those insights back to my team, which they use to help build new products or improve existing products. Let's talk about bias in user research. That can happen in many ways, in many shapes, in many forms. I'll give one example. In user research, we set out to interview people. What we may not realize is for every person we interview, we're probably excluding someone. And so, as a researcher, it's really important to know why we choose to interview certain people over others and who we are excluding, and whether or not those we're excluding need to actually be interviewed. One of the products I work on is Google Food Ordering, where we help consumers be able to order food from businesses around them. But along the way, we realized we hadn't really spoken to the merchants since we weren't really directly integrating with them. We didn't speak to them and understand their needs. So we set out to actually do that. Once we uncovered that insight, it was a light bulb moment for us. And we realized we had a great opportunity to build an ecosystem that was going to be equitable for everyone. As a researcher, you uncover so many insights. We take those insights and we're constantly improving on the products that we build. So overall, that solution enabled us to realize that, we need to understand the bigger picture, the whole ecosystem. We need to include all voices when we're designing so that we build a solution that is equitable and fair for all the people who will be impacted as a result.
This is it's not a test, but I will read it and then I will that let it link at you guys comment. Yes, I will put it link as the comment part. So just check the link at the comment part. And it's not a test, just yes or no. Anyway, move to the next one.
Hey there! Let's take a moment to review what you've learned recently. You started with the basics and understanding the role that UX research plays in the design process. Remember, the goal of user experience research is to prioritize the user. You also examined how UX research fits into the development of a product, including foundational research, design research, and post-launch research. Then, you were introduced to two ways to categorize research methods: primary and secondary research, and quantitative and qualitative research. As part of that conversation, you went through the benefits and drawbacks to popular research methods like secondary research, interviews, surveys, and usability studies. Finally, we talked about identifying and avoiding biases. You've come a long way. Keep up the good work.
Okay, next the written part. Oh no, it's just a definition of on the word. So if you guys want to read, just read it. But you guys just can skip the part. It's just waste time. This is a test. Yes, a test. What the U.S. research focus on? But I believe subs was you want design it ready. What is the manager? Depth. Depth. The US designer find one of the new features has been good. Boys. With diverse content assumption. Okay, this is my answer. Wow, it's kinda hard. Anyway, let's check the answers. Let's see, do you guys do right? Oh, I do this one wrong. So I think this one maybe this one. Yeah, this one maybe this one. This one maybe interview. Yeah, this one maybe interview. And this one is should not to be selected. Anyway, that's almost done, and we got cost review. There's a short reading part, not a set thought about design community, and this link I will put it at the comment part. This link too. A video. Yes.
Congratulations. You've completed the first course in the program. You worked incredibly hard, and it shows. You should be very proud of yourself. Back when you started this program, you might have been nervous or excited, or both. And you might have wondered what UX even meant. Now look at you. You now know what a UX designer does and what drives us to make products better for users. Let's review your accomplishments. In this course, you discovered user experience and why it's important for users and businesses, and learned what makes a design good for the user. Identify different disciplines within UX and what sort of tasks you might do as a UX designer. Learn the common tools, frameworks, and platforms used in UX design. Identify the steps of a design sprint and how you, as an entry-level UX designer, can take part in that process. You've covered a lot. You have a solid foundation in user experience that you can add to throughout the rest of this program. We'll build on your knowledge in the next course, where we'll get started with user research, understanding design problems, and brainstorming early solutions. Emily, who you met briefly in the introduction to the program, will be your guide for the next course. Emily is a fantastic instructor and really knowledgeable about the field of UX, so get ready to learn a lot. Now it's time for me to sign off. It's been such a pleasure taking you through this course. I can't wait to experience your designs in action one day. Good luck as you continue the program.
Okay. And this the if you want to saw the nice course, I will put a link down. Anyway, this is the end of learning UX design program by Google, and this is the final episode. Hope you guys have a good day, a nice time with your life, and my advice is attention in your own business. That's it. Good luck, man. Good luck, everyone.